Good morning. It is good to be with you this morning. This is our fifth, correct, or our fourth? Fifth? Our fifth spot here from the desk of the executive director. And this week, the weather didn't necessarily cooperate with us for us to take this outside the building to another location. So I have a couple of items that I'd really like to talk about and explore together with you. We had a fantastic meeting yesterday, a staff meeting. Here with all of our staff for a couple hours. We eat lunch and we sit down and have some conversation. We were especially talking about our core values for Back Bay Mission, and then one of our staff members, Sarah, shared a bit about her journey with her own personal core values and encouraged everybody to kind of develop their own personal core values. And we realized that one of the core values that seems really important to Back Bay Mission is the value of integrity, is living and moving and working with our clients and with the individuals, our guests that come here to Back Bay to receive services with integrity. And we had a pretty good list of core values, and the one that we added most recently was the core value of patience. And patience, we know, is a virtue, right? And it's so important for us to, right now, especially as we're still living in this time of COVID, and we're hopefully seeing a brighter light at the end of the tunnel, that we've really had to be patient with ourselves. We've had to be patient with other people. We've went through this incredible time of divisiveness in our country, right? During the election, during COVID, mask wearing, no mask wearing. And we've had to really learn to be patient with each other, to hear each other, and attempt to really maybe not understand each other, but at least respect each other's positions. But yesterday some issues came up in the middle of our meeting that I think really energized several of our staff, and some new awarenesses for me too, because each state is different. In the past, just so those of you who don't know me have an opportunity to get to know kind of the depth of my experience, is I ran a shelter for homeless, runaway, throwaway youth. That's kind of how the federal government defines these at-risk youth. And we would house 16 youth at the Pathfinders building at any given time, and we were usually full, and there was oftentimes a waiting list. And then we also had a street outreach program called Street Beat, and we would serve well over 2,000 youth a year on the streets that were living on the streets, or were temporarily living on the streets, or were what we call couch hopping from couch to couch. And out on the streets we provided clothing, we provided hygiene products, we provided actually HIV counseling and testing with the rapid test. We were the first in the nation there in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to provide access to rapid tests for HIV and AIDS to adolescents and to adults that were living on the streets. And some really fantastic work was done by the two therapists that I had on staff and all of my family youth specialists that worked with these youth to try to unify the families, to try to bring the families back together, or place that adolescent in a home that was sustainable, that was safe. Sometimes it was with an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent, or sometimes it was a foster home. And sometimes, sadly enough, the young people or adolescents would end up going into the system, which was kind of our last choice, because the child protective system and child protective services, at least in Milwaukee and in Wisconsin at the time, was pretty broken, much like our immigration system now. But as we were talking, and our rental assistance caseworker was sharing a story about one of her clients, she said that this consumer, this client, this friend was pregnant and was trying to determine what to do at the birth of her child, whether to give up the child to foster parent or to keep the child herself. And the conversation came up about, what about a homeless individual, right, who's pregnant, who is going to give birth? And the mother kind of vacillated, right? At first she said, I'm going to keep the baby. Then she said, no, I'm going to give the baby up for adoption. I'm going to keep the baby. I'm going to give the baby up for adoption. And her last decision was then to give that baby for adoption. And of course they have 72 hours. But what I found out is if that mother was living on the streets with the baby, that protective services would come immediately to take that baby away from her. And then we had this conversation about what's an appropriate parent, right? What parent has good parenting skills or not? Does a homeless mother have good parenting skills? Is it best for the child to be with the mother? Is it best for the child to be put in foster care or adopted? And so there was a really rich discussion, but it seemed like many of our staff were very frustrated, as I was too, as I understood that we had these 9 months, or at least 7 months, right, during the pregnancy of this woman, that we could have provided housing for her. We could have worked with her to give her the skills that she needs to parent, the skills she needs to maintain a safe home, a good home for this child, because we know how important it can be for a child to be with their birth mother or birth parents. And so it was a really fascinating discussion, and I realized part of our advocacy work then here at Back Bay Mission is really going to be about how do we serve minor moms, but also moms who are pregnant and who are homeless, and how do we really advocate for them that we can get them housing so they have sustainable housing when their child is born, that they can be with their child, they have the skills they need, they have the life skills, and they have the mothering needs. So that was something I'd like you to think about, and how do you in your own mind, because there's a lot of questions, right? And there's a lot of different opinions. We may have very different opinions on what it means for somebody who's homeless to give birth to a child. I knew a woman back in Phoenix, Allie, and she was very much a part of our work we were doing with people that were unsheltered in Phoenix. And she had been pregnant actually 3 times, and in her 3rd pregnancy, I saw Allie out in the community. I hadn't seen her for a while at our Sunday, Tuesday, or Thursday night feedings at the church. And I saw Allie, and she was obviously pregnant. And so I pulled up, rolled down my window, and said, "Allie, let's go meet at McDonald's and have a conversation." And I said, "Allie, you're pregnant." And she said, "No, I'm not." I said, "Allie, you're pregnant." She said, "No, I'm not." I said, "Allie, look in the mirror, you're pregnant." And so finally, and this was her 3rd pregnancy, as I understand it, she said, "Yes, I am pregnant," finally in her 7th month, right? We took her to the emergency room. They kind of did a full evaluation, and she gave birth to a baby and adopted that baby out. But Allie suffers from some chronic mental health issues, schizophrenia, bipolar, and so it was really difficult for her to embrace or to accept or even to acknowledge the fact that she was pregnant. And it may not have been appropriate, right, for Allie to keep the child because she was non-compliant with her medications and she would have schizophrenic breaks. But as we talked about this homeless mother yesterday, it reminded me of Allie and reminded me there are so many ways that we as a community could advocate for homeless individuals, right? Especially for individuals that may be giving birth, because none of us can imagine probably what that would ever be like, being on the streets and being pregnant. So I'd like you to kind of think about that, and hey, if you have suggestions for how we at Back Bay Mission can advocate for this community, can advocate in special ways for that community, and work with Child Protective Services and with social services, and maybe find a way to have a movement to say, hey, you know, everybody deserves a house. This is a human right. Everybody deserves shelter, but especially women who are pregnant or families who don't have a home and have young children. So I want to share a couple of quotes in closing. And this one is from Mother Teresa. And it is a beautiful quote. And I think Mother Teresa can be kind of trite, right? There's a lot of other people that have talked about poverty and talk about homelessness. But Mother Teresa, I think, is one of those that really lived, by the way, I started out and talked about core values. She lived her values, right? And she didn't come by this naturally. This is something she grew into and decided to live among the homeless and people in poverty in Calcutta and throughout India. And so this is what she says. We think sometimes that poverty is only being hungry, naked, and homeless. The poverty of being unwanted, unloved, and uncared for is the greatest poverty. We must start in our own homes to remedy this kind of poverty. Isn't that incredibly powerful? And I think of that woman with child, and I think about Allie back in Phoenix, and so many of our homeless guests and friends here. I mean, it's only the beginning of being hungry and being naked and being homeless, right? And the many services we provide here in our Micah Drop-In Center. But imagine the poverty of being unwanted, of being unloved, and being uncared for. And some of us experience that poverty, right? Because we don't have families that embrace us or love us as they should, or we have difficult marriages and difficult relationships. And sometimes we find ourselves very alone. And actually during the season of COVID, some of us may feel more unloved and uncared for because we're isolated. And so she says we must start in our own homes to remedy this kind of poverty. And so I would suggest to you, start in your own home, and your heart is your home, right? That's that heart, that soul that's in you, your body is your home. And start within yourself to think about, how can we make sure that none of us have to live in the poverty of feeling unwanted and unloved and uncared for. And then there's another quote that is so similar from somebody by the name of Paige Dirth, who is a writer and an author and a speaker. And I'm reading this off my computer screen, so excuse me for turning away, but she says, the worst poverty isn't about not having enough money to survive. Real poverty is when there is no one in the world who loves you, when there's no other human to make you feel like you matter, as if you aren't worth the air that you breathe. Poverty of love is the worst thing you can be deprived of. And that may be a sad place to end, but I also think the gift of being here at Back Bay and being here for the last 5-6 months has really been seeing the love, seeing the goodness and the mercy and the grace that is extended here by our staff. They really aren't just staff, but they're human beings who have a heart for the homeless, for those living in the margins, for those who feel unloved, unwanted, that we try to make them feel wanted and cared for, if even for just a few hours at the Micah Day Center, if even just for a few hours or a few weeks as we're rehabbing their homes, if even just for a few hours as they come and take a shower, wash their clothes, access the food bank, and they receive a food of their choice. It's a choice food bank. These are really, really important ways to make people feel loved and cared for. And I hope today, you feel some sense of love. And if you're watching this, we want to let you know we value and appreciate you, and you're important to us. And we hope we're important to you, and to continue to support Back Bay and the work we do. And spend some time maybe going full circle around your own core values. What is it you value most? And I guess as I've come to realize moving back to Mississippi, being around family, that I'm really valuing the gift of love and the gift of connection. Connection not just with family of birth, but family of choice, right? And finding connections with the staff here at Back Bay. And one of our staff persons who takes care of our Micah Day Center, Deborah, had some really beautiful words to say yesterday. She said to all of us, you're all here because you're supposed to be here, and you're all here because you care about people and you love people. And she said that with such a power and a grace that I can't imitate, but it was just one of the most beautiful things. So we appreciate you watching this, and I hope you're challenged by those words today, and you really think about, how do we as a community, because it really takes a village, right? It's going to take all of us to create this kind of social, systemic change where we really take care of and we make sure that everybody is housed and everybody has shelter, because that's a human right. Not just food and water, but shelter and also love really should be a human right. So thanks for joining us today. Feel free to respond with your questions, your concerns, maybe your comments and how you're processing the world in which we live. So thanks for joining us, and we'll hopefully see you next week.